classroom so the teachers can get through what they need to do.
The question, well, I mean, you know,
Yeah,
discipline is.
what can be done about this?
As far as sending more people to Renaissance?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so.
Just handling discipline in the class.
Yeah, I think that, you know, maintaining, so the thing with discipline is it's maintaining an environment in the classroom where education can happen,
Yeah.
right? That's the goal. And so for students that you cannot sort of get back into the normal flow of things so that education can happen, you know, those students, you know, need to be in alternative settings. We are fortunate in Virginia Beach that that's a significant investment that we've made. Not every area has something like that, and no area really has anything like that, especially for elementary school students, because there is no funding available for that at all. And that's something that's really being discussed at the state level right now, is how to provide more alternatives for students that are discipline issues that are interrupting the educational environment.
And we're doing a pilot program on the elementary. But
Yes.
my take on discipline, and again, this is Carolyn Weems, so just Carolyn Weems. You know, we do have a lot of programs, PBIS, a lot of stuff out there, a lot of cultural awareness programs, you know, to discipline, and we have a lot of staff development. I'm kind of old school. I think when you walk through that door, you have school culture, you know, and that we've got to make sure that kids behave in a way that they should behave in the school building. And no matter what background you come from, or what you're taught at home, or what is allowed at home, to me, when you enter the school, you have a school culture that you have to adopt to for those 8 hours. And so you know, when I go to a school and hear a teacher said, you know, that kid told me F off, you know, 6 or 7 times, to me, that's unacceptable. That's not school culture. And so I'm pretty strong at that, and I think that's where we're lacking. I think in some cases, we kind of said, well, you know, this person, you don't know their background, or you don't know what's allowed, or that, you know, and, you know, follow school culture is my take. So how we get there, I'm not sure. So that's,
You gotta sell it.
yeah, school culture. Maybe that would be from school culture.
I would like to know if, at what point we were looking at having teachers on the CIP projects, because when you decide to build a building, this has historically been the system's policy. You bring in the architecture, you bring in that firm, they have a committee and the teachers meet, and they put out the plan, and people that are in the trenches say, this design is not going to work because this area is incorrect, because this is what we need here. And they say, thank you very much, and they leave and they build it exactly the way they intended to build it. And I can name the buildings in the city now that's the case. So when are we going to actually have the architects adhere to what the needs are educationally, as opposed to we're building monuments and we're building Taj Mahals and we're getting that LEED certificate there, which means nothing when the functionality of the building is not there.
In presentations to us, I think there's a lot of focus on what the outcomes of those meetings were and how it impacted the programming and structure of the building. In fact, we had a very, 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 very long presentation on that from the Thorogood architect.
Yes.
Sorry, it's good. You had to be there.
Yeah.
And talking about that cycle of bringing people in and how it affected. I have not been part of those committees. I know that Kim Melnick on the board has been part of the Princess Anne team. It would be interesting to talk to her to kind of get that perspective, what she saw, what people were suggesting, and if it actually ends up in the final plan. I don't have anything to say that is or isn't happening as an individual member right now.
I think that's a great point, and again, speaking just from Carolyn Weems, I hear that all the time. I hear like, why are you asking me for input when you're not really using it? It can be anything, with grading scale, with this new thing about we're doing with the grading law.
Latin honor system.
Yeah, Latin honor system, to change in schools, to put them in portables, and I hear that all the time. So in my opinion, the school board needs to do a better job, and I'll take responsibility, I'm not throwing anybody else under the bus, into getting all the information out way in advance, getting input way in advance, critiquing that input, then coming back with a recommendation, then do it again to make that recommendation the best it can be. I think I cannot stand when the perception and or reality is we've got input, but the decision's already been made.
Is there a possibility that you have teachers on that committee? I
We
know
do
we're
have
always.
I know that there are
There's
teachers part of it.
There's
Yes.
teachers on pretty much all our.
Yes.
They just talked about how there were not just community,
Yeah.
there was a lot of community involvement. They had over 15 meetings in
And
the
the-
past year.
Well, like in Thorogood, they had,
Right.
yeah, so many
And
meetings for teachers.
Parents,
Yeah,
they even had some students
yeah.
involved.
It hasn't been.
They hadn't been like that, doing that.
Well, maybe it's already been something that's been
Yeah, the
improved.
teachers
Just started
had
doing
huge,
this.
huge input with this and the older nation school, huge
And
teacher.
Prince Penn Middle has a lot of teachers on their
Yeah,
committee as
yeah.
well.
So, but that's, we hear that a lot, and we do.
Right.
I want input, whether I agree with you or disagree, so it's
Sure.
helpful.
Brad, you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the capital improvement projects as well. Have we worked ourselves into a difficult situation? You put up $60 million per year in the capital improvement budget, and there is value to these schools that we are building, but they are monuments. I like the idea that our kids are walking by a cistern that's collecting rooftop rainwater on the way, but we're paying $100 million per high school, we're paying $60 million per middle school, College Park Elementary, whatever the case. What is the long-term trajectory? Because just 12 high schools, it would take 20 years to replace 12 high schools if that were our immediate goal right now. What's the long-term plan? Because the capital improvement budget ain't gonna do it.
Yeah, well, there's a few things that are happening. One is that the whole capital improvement planning process has kind of been rebooted. So the plan that we have right now is now, I think, over 10 years old, so we're looking at sort of that schedule again. The other side of that is the board is having serious conversations about how much money we're putting into the design and materials of these buildings. I will say that from my personal vantage point that there are some of those costs that I think are more important than others. Getting the energy usage per square footage down is a significant goal in my head. The new buildings we build are far more cheaper to operate, even though they cost more. We're looking at Tony Arnold, who works facilities for us, is saying that a lot of these things have about a 12-year ROI on them for a 100-year building. And if we think that energy market's not going to become more volatile over 20, 50 years, I think we'd be kidding ourselves. I think what we can do to lower operating costs as far as energy usage for these buildings are really important for the long-term sustainability of our division. There's a third thing that's sort of happening that I think is going to be on our agenda coming up is the possibility of some public-private partnerships to speed up our building cycle for these schools, because our schedule's way out. As it stands right now, Bayside High School will be 98 years old by the time it gets replaced. And I just don't think that's acceptable. So that's why putting money in the PAYGO is important. That's why looking at some of these cost issues are important. What actually is providing savings to a school versus what is maybe nice to do, I think is a conversation we have. And I think based on the recent conversations that the board is having, that we want to sink our teeth into that and get a hold of what's going on.
Yeah, and the pounds, I mean, we have been asking questions about Thorogood and because, I mean, right here, Princess Anne High School, $127 million. So I would like to see cuts in that. And I think that we've made some suggestions to cut some costs even in Thorogood Elementary, but that's in 2023. We got down here that, we're looking at 2000, it's all the way out here to 2081. So we can't do that, so we got to figure out a way to do it, or I'm all for trimming some of the expenses that I don't think are, necessary.
I don't think this board is passive when it comes to those projects.
I don't think we are, well, I think we're starting, I think we have
Well,
been.
now, heading
have
into it.
been.
I think the recent
We
conversation.
just rubber stamped what the architect said, and from our meetings last time, we questioned about a tree, and they had some tree in Thorogood for the four-year season. How much does that cost? So I'm going to be asking tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of questions.
Sure.
If we have one more, we can take one more question.
Actually, I have several.
Okay.
Piggying back on one, Brett, what puzzles me, you walk into these new high schools and get this huge, huge entrance.
Mm-hmm.
It must cost millions of dollars. I say, why? And why do we keep doing it? That's talking about building monuments instead of buildings. That's just an aside. What I really wanted to ask was several things. We keep reading or hearing that the teachers have to teach to the SOL, I think it's called, to spend so much time getting the kid to learn the stuff to pass the test and not having time to devote to other parts of the education process. Now, I just want to throw these quick questions because they're probably quick answers. Another one I wondered about the challenged children. Having take her to take into account the home environment of some of these kids. You
Well,
know
that's,
what I mean?
that's
Yeah.
sort of the equity issue.
Yeah, that's the equity that
That's
we're
a major
really
issue,
looking,
and I
yes, yeah,
maybe brought
poverty.
up and I missed it.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, poverty in their home environment is a huge indicator in their success in school, and we definitely take that into account, and help them to be success, not to use it as an excuse, but then give them the resources and
That's,
the
okay.
conditions that they need to overcome those
Sounds like
challenges.
you addressed it. I
Yeah,
just haven't-
yeah.
I mean, you saw the map, where we were
Another
looking
quick
at that.
question. I assume we have a teachers union,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and, you know, nationwide, we see teachers go on strike and shut down schools. We haven't seen that happen. But allied to that question is what I wanted to
Yeah.
ask is, you also hear in school systems the inability to get rid of a bad teacher.
Mhm.
I mean, you're just stuck. You hear in some areas, New York City, where they just put them someplace, pay them to keep going there and not teach. Are we faced with that sort of issue in our school system?
So one, Virginia's a right to work state, which means public employees can't form unions. What they have are associations.
Okay, well,
They don't have the ability to strike, and they don't have, what is that,
Okay.
combined negotiation. That's not the word for it. It's
Collective bargaining.
collective bargaining, thank you. I had like the definition. For as far as teachers that are struggling, what we have now is through the evaluation system, if a teacher has low evaluations for honestly a fairly short amount of time, that they can essentially be put on probation and then let go. But what we try very hard to do is if a teacher is struggling, also it's kind of similar to students, is make sure that they have the resources and support needed to get to that level of instruction that we're expecting from them. But if they don't reach that level, I mean, they can be let go.
Yeah, and we have.
Yes.
We've done that, and I think it's critical, because that is just highly unfair to a student to have a whole year of a teacher that's not effective, or 2 years straight.
And you hear about that.
And new teachers are actually on probation for
Yeah,
3 years. So any from year to year, they're not guaranteed to come back if they're not meeting our expectations.
My first question about the
Teachers can
SOL.
lose
Oh,
The
that's
SOLs, we're with you.
Yeah.
So I'm chair of the legislative committee. I've actually succeeded Carolyn is being chair of the legislative committee. And that's something that we are very clear with our state delegation, saying we need more flexibility when it comes to SOLs. Now remember, we're balancing this desire by the public with so much money going to schools to make sure our schools are performing at certain levels, which is what the SOLs are meant to do. But we've gotten to a point where you're right, we're so constricted that we need some additional flexibility. So maybe instead of that SOL, we have different performance measures to assess where students are on those materials, but also allows for other educational activities rather than maybe just focusing on passing that test.
I mean, we hear that too.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank